Hey YouTube, how's it going? Like you saw in the title, today I'm going to talk about low carb versus low fat diets as far as weight loss, because I know a lot of you guys, especially with the new year, you guys are trying to lose weight most likely and get in better shape. And I've had a couple people ask me, what is the best diet for losing weight? Is it low carb, low fat, vegan diet, or whatever other options? And I just decided I would actually do some research and find articles, clinical trials, reviews, and try to approach this as objectively as possible without any bias and see actually which diet is shown scientifically to be the best for weight loss. So I'm just going to jump right into it. The first article that I found was done by Aude et al. In 2004, and they found that a low-carb diet lost a total of 13.6 pounds compared to 7.5 pounds in the standard diet, which the standard diet consisted of 55% carb, 30% fat, and 15% protein after 12 weeks. So this wasn't a low carb versus low fat diet. This was just a low carb versus your standard American diet. And after 12 weeks, they lost 6 more pounds. But I think it is important to remember that this looked at weight loss and not necessarily fat loss. And a good portion of that weight may be water weight from the reduced carbs and not just fat loss. So that's one thing that the author wanted to stress with their conclusions. So another study that I found by Foster et al. In 2003 looked at the difference between a low carb and a low fat diet. And when they checked in at 3 and 6 months, people in the low carb diet lost significantly more weight than the low fat diet. But after 12 months, there was no difference in weight loss. So what does that mean exactly? Basically, after the 6-month period, the low-carb diet gained a little more weight back, which the author suggests that this would mean that the low-carb diet was probably harder to follow and there's more difficulty adhering to that style of diet. So initially, the low-carb diet lost more weight, but in the longer term, after an entire year, the weight loss wasn't significant. Another study had similar results as well between a low carb and low fat diet by Mohler et al. In 2013. And this actually saw no differences at any point from 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, and even 2 years. There's no significant differences in weight loss at any period of time between the low carb and low fat group. So another study that I found by Soenen et al. 2012 looked at 4 different types of diets. So listen carefully because this might get a little confusing. I'm probably going to label them on the screen. But there is a normal protein and a normal carb diet. And then there was a high protein and a normal carb diet. So 2 normal carb diets. And then there was a normal protein low carb diet. And then a high protein low carb diet. And the normal protein diets had 0.7 grams per kilogram. And then the high protein diets had 1.1 gram per kilogram. And after 12 months, there were no significant differences in body weight, fat mass, or fat-free mass in either of the 4 diets. So out of the 2 types of low-carb diets and the 2 types of normal carb diets, none of the 4 diets were shown to be superior than the other 3. So those are 4 actual clinical trials that I found. And I also found a review article by McGuckin and Foster in 2011. And they reviewed different types of weight loss diets. And what they found by looking at all of the literature was that low-carb diets were shown to have greater weight loss compared to low-fat diets in short term after roughly 6 months, but weight loss seemed to level out between the 2 types of diets after 1 year. Also, adherence seemed to decrease over time, particularly with the lower-carb diets in one of the studies that they found. And this suggested that low-carb diets are just harder to sustain in the long run for the general population. So they also found by looking at the literature that moderate fat diets, which contain roughly 34 to 45% of your daily caloric intake, might be easier to adhere to than lower fat diets even. And this kind of diet is similar to the Mediterranean diet, which is very high in monounsaturated fats, as well as having high intake of plant foods such as fruits and vegetables, with very low saturated fats. So just for reference, the AMDR, which is the acceptable macronutrient distribution range for fat, is 20 to 35% of your total calories per day. So this is a little higher in fat percentage as what the AMDR is. So then I found a clinical trial by Du et al. In 2007, and this was comparing a moderate fat with a high monounsaturated fat content, so 40% of their calories came from fat, a low-fat diet, and then a typical Western diet with 35% of their calories coming from fat, but very little monounsaturated fats and greater than 15% saturated fats. So this study wasn't looking at weight loss, it was looking at weight regain after 6 months. And the body fat gain was significantly lower in the moderate fat and low fat groups, but they all gained the same amount of body weight back, which is interesting because that would mean that the moderate fat and the low fat groups gain more lean body mass than the typical Western diet with 35% fat and a higher saturated fat content. So this was really interesting to me that the low fat and the moderate fat with high monounsaturated fat contents were equally effective in reducing the amount of fat gain after 6 months. So this shows that the type of fat that you consume plays a huge role in what kind of body weight you gain. And this suggests that the phrase "a calorie is a calorie" may not necessarily be true when looking at what type of body weight you're gaining, especially when you're comparing lean body mass to body fat. It is important to remember that from the study, they did not mention how much physical activity either group was doing. So the moderate fat and the low fat group may have been doing more resistance training than the normal, typical Western diet was. So that possibly could have played a role in how much lean body mass each group was gaining. So after reading these articles, I just came up with 5 main points that I want to end with. 1, low-carb diets seem to be more effective for short-term weight loss when compared to low-fat diets. But 2, in the long term, the success of either type seems to level out, especially after 12 months, and this is possibly due to low-carb diets just being harder to sustain in the long run. 3, moderate fat diets with a high monounsaturated fat content seem to be shown to be easier to adhere to and also effective in reducing body fat regain after 6 months. Number 4, don't forget the importance of individual variability. A friend might be successful on a low-carb diet, but you might find it easier to adhere to a low-fat diet. And just remember that one size doesn't necessarily fit all. And 5, don't stress the small stuff. No diet was shown to be extremely better than the other from this research, so try to get the basics down first. For example, eating in a caloric deficit and exercising regularly before you start making things complicated and stressing about specific macronutrient intakes. So that's the end of the video. Hope it wasn't too long, and just let me know if you guys like this kind of research stuff. I kind of want to make my channel more about research and not just about what's worked for me necessarily. So let me know if you liked it. Leave a like, comment if you have any ideas for other videos, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks.